Thank you for joining Leo today for this webinar, Nudging Towards a College Scholarship, Insights from an Enrollment Intervention. My name is Andrea Ringer, and I'm a research associate at Leo, the Wilson Sheehan Lab for Economic Opportunities at the University of Notre Dame, and I'm happy to be hosting the webinar today. First, some information about Leo. Leo is a nonpartisan research center established in 2012. We partner with nonprofit and government agencies across the country to generate reliable, scientific evidence about the impact of programs designed to reduce poverty and improve lives. Our areas of interest include housing, health, criminal justice, education, child welfare, and self-sufficiency. Once we have generated reliable evidence, we work with partners to share this information with a wide range of policymakers and practitioners to drive policy, program, and funding decisions, and, in turn, to improve lives. A few quick housekeeping notes for this webinar. The webinar is 1 hour. The presentation will be approximately 35 minutes, with 15 to 20 minutes for Q&A. You are muted as a participant in the webinar, but you should feel free to ask questions using the Q&A button at the top of the screen throughout the webinar. We will get to as many questions as possible. Finally, we will post a recording of the webinar and the slides on Leo's website at leo.nd.edu. We will send an email with details following the webinar. With that, let me introduce the presenters on today's webinar, Dr. Sarah Krager and Carla Lee. Sarah Krager is a research assistant professor at Leo. She is a co-principal investigator on the evaluation of this college scholarship enrollment nudge. Sarah received a bachelor's in economics from the College of William and Mary and her PhD in economics from Boston University. Prior to joining Leo in 2017, she was an assistant professor of economics at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. Carla Lee is the director of middle schools with South Bend Community School Corporation. She was born and raised in South Bend, Indiana, and attended South Bend Washington High School. She obtained a bachelor's in education from Bethel College and a master's in education and K-12 administration from the Indiana University of South Bend. Carla has been married to her husband for 28 years, and they are the proud parents of 3 adult children. Carla has held previous positions in South Bend schools as a middle school teacher and administrator. She has also taught as an adjunct professor at St. Mary's College, Indiana University of South Bend, and the TRIO Upward Bound program at the University of Notre Dame. In today's Leo webinar, Sarah and Carla will share findings from a nudge intervention to encourage enrollment in the 21st Century Scholars Program, a scholarship program to help low-income families in the state of Indiana pay for college. They will discuss key insights from the study, including description of the economic problem of low enrollment, research design and implementation of the evaluation, working with Leo to conduct an impact evaluation, findings of the evaluation and policy implications, impact for South Bend Community School Corporation and individual students, and research-informed change in enrollment procedures as a result of the evaluation. With that, I would like to turn this over to Sarah to begin the presentation on nudging towards a college scholarship.
Thank you, Andrea, and thank you to each of you participants for joining this webinar. So today, Carla and I are going to talk about an evaluation of a project that was designed to increase enrollment in this Indiana College Scholarship, which is called 21st Century Scholars. And it was within 2 of our local school districts, the South Bend Community School Corporation and the Penn Harris Madison School District. So 21st Century Scholars, or we call it 21C for short, is a state-run program that was established in 1990, and it helps families pay for college by providing low-income students with up to 4 years of college tuition and fees for any public Indiana college or university. And the average benefit of this scholarship is around $35,000 in scholarship funds. And as well, in addition to the tuition, there's also the value of having a college degree, because someone with a 4-year degree will earn approximately $1 million more over her lifetime than someone with a high school diploma. So this scholarship can be literally life-changing for eligible students. The eligibility for 21C is simply based on family income, and students can enroll in 21C if they're free and reduced lunch eligible, which means they need to have a household income less than or equal to 185% of the federal poverty line. So for example, a student from a family of 4 earning less than $46,435 per year is FRL eligible, so they would also be eligible for 21C. The way this program works is that students need to enroll at the end of their 8th grade year, and then they have to meet certain milestones throughout high school to remain in good standing for the program. And this hard deadline to enroll is June 30th of a student's 8th grade year, so at the end of their 8th grade year. And there's no way for them to enroll after this point. So unfortunately, in spite of the large benefit of this program, many eligible students do not meet this June 30th deadline, and as a result, only a small fraction end up enrolling. So in fact, we can see in the data that currently less than half of eligible students enroll by that deadline, and this low take-up rate is particularly bad for majority-minority districts and high-need districts like South Bend. In this figure, we can see the 21C enrollment rate by cohort. So it starts with the high school class of 2018, 2019, 2020, and then the high school class of 2021 is the cluster on the far right. And the bars show the enrollment rate for the state of Indiana overall, and the South Bend Community School Corporation and Penn Harris Madison. Our intervention was targeted at the class of 2021 in these 2 school districts. And you can see that the red bar, which is the overall enrollment rate for Indiana, is well below 50% for each of these cohorts. But the take-up is even lower for SBCSC and PHM. And in particular, the dark blue series, which shows SBCSC, had an enrollment rate of around 30% for the 3 cohorts preceding the nudge intervention, which is just remarkably low considering the large benefits of the scholarship. So what's the reason behind these low take-up rates? There are several factors that we considered. First of all, parents might just forget about the deadline to enroll because they're in the middle of busy work schedules and family schedules. Secondly, the enrollment process requires some detailed information about the students and the students' schools and the parents' own tax information, and it's perhaps a little bit inconvenient to hunt this information down when they need it. And then finally, the families may not understand the very large dollar value of a full tuition scholarship or the large monetary value of their child receiving a college degree. And this is especially true for students who might be the first person in their family to attend college. So our enrollment outreach was designed to target each of these issues. Before I go into detail about how we implemented this project, you can see from the graph that these 2 school districts did see an increase after the nudge intervention. Especially in SBCSC, the cohort that received the intervention had a noticeably higher enrollment at 37% compared to the earlier 30%. And I'm going to explain exactly how we quantified the impact of the intervention, but first I'll go over the design of the nudge and what we actually did. So Leo partnered with these 2 school districts to carry out the intervention as a randomized control trial, or an RCT. And the sample for the study was a list of all the 8th grade students from the 2 school districts who were eligible for free and reduced lunch, and so they were eligible for 21C, but they had not yet enrolled as of June 1st, 2017. So recall that the deadline for these students was going to be the end of that month. So we compiled the list at the beginning of June, and each student in this sample was assigned by random lottery to one of 3 experimental arms. We had a phone call group, a letter group, and a control group. So here we had 2 types of treatment groups, and the control group was for comparison. And the control group did not receive any special outreach, but we did reach out to the parents of the participants in the 2 treatment groups with either a phone call or a letter. And we told them about the 21C program and encouraged them to enroll their child in the program. So since we suspected that an information gap was preventing parents from enrolling their children, we wanted to present the missing information in a very clear and concise way. So both the letter nudge and the phone call nudge were designed to include 4 main components to combat the informational gap. The first component was there was a clear explanation of the program, including that dollar amount of $35,000, which is the average benefit that a student would receive. Secondly, we gave them the estimated difference in lifetime earnings for someone with a college degree compared to someone with only a high school degree. That was that $1 million number. And thirdly, we provided the personalized information for each student that was needed to complete the enrollment form. And this included the child's personal 9-digit student test number. There's a 4-digit middle school code, a 4-digit high school code. Fourthly, we reminded parents about the June 30th deadline, and we also told them to go to the 21C website where they could find the enrollment form and complete it online. So the letter group received this information written out on a hard letter, and it was sent to the parents' home. And the call group received the same information, just a verbal version, over the phone. And we timed this intervention to take place about 2 weeks before the deadline, so in the middle of June. So there was a sense of urgency, and parents understood they really needed to fill out the form right away. So sometimes, the contact phone number that we had didn't work, or no one answered the phone. But in order to maximize the impact of the call treatment, we placed up to 2 calls for any given number in the call group. And if there was no answer when the first call was made, then instead of leaving a voicemail, the call staff just added that number back to the list to be called. If there was still no answer on the second call, then we did leave a voicemail that contained each of those 4 main components from the phone script. We also had callers on hand who could explain the information in Spanish. So our call staff, if they reached someone who sounded like they might not be comfortable in English, they would ask them in Spanish if they preferred to speak in Spanish, if they preferred to have the conversation in Spanish, and then they would transfer them over to the Spanish-speaking call staff. So because our students were assigned to each of the 3 experimental arms through a lottery, we can interpret any difference in enrollment between the 3 groups as a direct effect of the outreach effort, instead of being caused by differences in characteristics between the groups. The advantage of an RCT, of a randomized controlled trial, is that you get treatment and control groups that look identical, except for the services they receive from the intervention. And this balancing table is just a test to make sure the 3 groups really do look statistically similar in all their observable characteristics. So for each of these characteristics on the left column, we measured the difference between the control group and the call group, and then the control group and the letter group. So for example, on that first row, you can see that 50% of the control group was male, and there were a few percentage points difference in the male composition for the call group and the letter group. And then, the mean GPA for the control group was 2.662, and the difference in GPA between control and call was only 0.001. So the call group mean GPA was 2.661, so a very small difference. And then we have these 2 columns of p-values, and the p-value tells us if the difference indicates whether or not the 2 groups are similar in each attribute. So when we get a large p-value, it means the characteristics look the same across groups. And in this case, that's what we want. We want them to look very similar. Generally, we use a value of 0.05 for the p-value cutoff. So since almost all of these p-values are greater than 0.05, we're fairly confident that we're comparing apples to apples when we measure the differences in the rates across the 3 groups. There was this small difference between the fraction of the control group and the call group with GPA in the highest bracket. You can see that right around in this row here. We did have a p-value that was less than the cutoff. What this is saying is that the share of the group that had this very high GPA was a little bit different between control and call. But because the rest of the distribution and the mean GPA was similar across the 3 groups, we didn't consider this to be a major concern. For the most part, the 3 groups look very similar in all their characteristics. So this next table shows our key results from our analysis. The intent to treat effect is the impact of being assigned to the treatment group compared to the control group. And once again, we're going to measure differences between the groups, and we look at the p-value to tell us if the difference is statistically meaningful. But now we're looking at the difference in the enrollment rate in 21C. And in this case, a small p-value tells us the outcomes are meaningfully different, so we're looking for a small p-value. We looked at both the differences in applications to enroll in the program and also in the rate of approved applications. And this first row shows that 8.9% of the control group completed the form, and the application rate in the letter group was 4.6 percentage points higher. Even though this difference is not quite statistically significant, we still see a positive magnitude. The application rate in the call group was 8.2 percentage points higher than the control, and this difference was statistically significant. Next, we looked at the application approved outcome, and we saw positive differences for both letter and the call, although these differences were not quite significant. Again, we see the magnitude of the call effect is larger than the letter. So the call increased the application approved rate by 5.4 percentage points versus only 4.7 percentage points for the letter group. We can look at this figure that summarizes our main results, which is that being assigned to the telephone call nudge group increased the enrollment rate of our target population by 92% because it raised it from this 8.9% up to 17.1%. We also have this weaker evidence that the letter increased application rates and that both the letter and call increased approved enrollments, although these other effects were not statistically significant in our data set. It's possible that the p-values for these effects would be smaller if we had a larger sample. Another issue that we encountered was that not everyone assigned to the two treatment groups received the information they were supposed to. For example, we can't really confirm if parents in the letter group actually received and read the letter that was mailed to them. But we can confirm that not all families in the call group were successfully called. As I mentioned earlier, sometimes the contact phone number that the school had on file didn't work, or when we called the number, no one answered the phone, which is not really surprising because these lower income families often have less reliable contact information, or sometimes the parents are working during the day and they can't answer the phone. So to narrow in on what happened if we actually were able to reach them, in other words, to measure the impact of successfully receiving the information, we looked at what's known as the treatment on treated effect for the call group. This treatment on treated effect is the change in the probability of enrollment that happens when someone actually learns the key information. So we defined this outcome in two different ways. First, we defined it as whether or not our call staff actually spoke to a parent. So the parent answered the phone and talked to the research staff about the 21C application and those four key informational components. Alternatively, we defined it as either speaking to the parent directly or being able to successfully leave a voicemail. So from this table, you can see that 51.8% of the phone call attempts reached a parent directly, and 83.4% of the attempts either reached the parent directly or they were able to leave a message in a working voicemail box. And you can see that when the outreach staff actually spoke to a parent, the enrollment rate was 15.8 percentage points higher than the enrollment of the control group. This means that when we were able to place a successful call, it increased the enrollment probability of the subsample that we were targeting from 8.9% to nearly 25%, which is pretty dramatic, given that this intervention was a very low cost, light touch nudge, and we conducted it over a relatively short period of time. Notice that when we define the treatment as either conversation or voicemail, which is that second row, the impact decreases in magnitude. It goes from that 15.8 percentage points to only 9.8 percentage points, but it is still significant. So just to wrap up, the takeaway from this intervention was that we're able to show the nudge significantly increased the enrollment rate for the treatment group. And it's clear that phone calls are more effective than mailing out letters in spite of the high number of families that we were not able to reach by phone. And the intervention really had an impact in spite of its simplicity and minimal effort. It's possible that if we did a more intensive outreach effort, it would show an even larger increase in the take-up. And finally, the research findings strongly supported our hypothesis that families were failing to enroll in 21C because of a steep informational barrier, and so providing that information is the key to increasing their take-up rate. So now I'd like to turn this over to Carla Lee, the Director of Middle Schools for SBCSC. Carla worked very closely with Leo to coordinate this intervention, and she's going to talk about what the experience was like from the school district's perspective.
So thank you so much for the information thus far. So I'd like to begin just to talk about the history of working with the Leo Center and the connection between South Bend schools. We were fortunate enough to establish a connection via one of our school board members and president at the time, Mr. Jay Caponegro, who also happens to serve on faculty staff at the University of Notre Dame. And in his capacity as Director of Community Engagement, one of the focus areas is to how the resources that are available at the university could help facilitate some of the goals within South Bend Community School Corporation. And specifically, one of the goals for South Bend Schools is to how do we increase the enrollment rate of our students and prepare them for 21st century learning post-secondary. Some of the responses to research and the requirements, we have protocols that are in place under our policy and guidelines when when outside agencies are seeking to conduct any evaluation or research study using our student data. And that was completed at the request of with our Director of Research and Evaluation, Dr. John Ritzler, along with the LEO faculty and staff, to providing him the opportunity to review the intentions, what data is needed to conduct the research, and then what the outcome, the established outcome. So following the initial approval from Dr. Ritzler and then informing our assistant superintendent, and school board of trustees, then those green lights were granted to then conduct this impact study. Some of the challenges during the intervention, although minimal, I do want to certainly share some of the challenges that we did face. And basically, those were small challenges, such as creating space so that the participants could have the space, both using technology and establishing phone lines and establishing a working space for printing and stuffing envelopes. So, and doing that under that very close timeline that was mentioned earlier, because we were faced with, again, a 2-week window to complete this task. And then the planning structure itself, working with the middle school counselors to obtain the information that we knew that we needed to have in order to include in both the letter and also the information the students and the parents would need to complete the application. Some of the other internal challenges were, again, having and granting access on our student information system. And in my absence, then, if I was not able to be with all of the LEO students, who would then help facilitate that so that the study could continue and the processes could continue. So establishing and again, those small challenges, none of them were large enough that impacted or slowed the study down. We just would use that information should we take another step of using that to plan. The cost to SBCSC was very minimal. It was basically the cost of mailing the letters in the group that received the letters, ensuring that the mailing was covered, and that cost was under $200, so a very minimal cost. So the partnership, again, I mentioned with South Bend Schools, one of our goals with South Bend Schools as established in our strategic plan is specifically preparing every student for post-secondary success. And whatever those supports will look like. So if you were a first-generation student completing the application for the first time, or your parents, or you have family members or friends who have attended college or university. What we now know is that a lot of those changes, there are changes annually. So whether they had experience as, or not having experience as first generation, we wanted to ensure that we were addressing all the needs of the students that we serve. Our current year enrollment is yet to be determined. But last year, in that last cohort for 2021, it increased, as was mentioned prior, to the 30th percentile. And we are working on extracting the numbers for our current 21st century campaign. We wanted to share, reach out to some of the students and parents and ask as a very informal evaluation as to what they found as a benefit and certainly what we could improve upon in these efforts. And so from the students' perspective, they were able to help connect or make a greater connection between the transition from 8th grade then to grades 9 through 12, what that transition really meant, and that bridge between that 8th grade year and that freshman year. What are some of the things that they had to prepare for in order to be successful in grades 9 through 12? Specifically, in what classes they should enroll in, and what are some of the benchmarks that they could begin to check off now that they had submitted their 21st century application. South Bend was recently recognized for the efforts and the increase in enrolling students in 21st century application and moving forward with their benchmarks. That acknowledgement now, we have been designated as representatives for the annual publication for Learn More Indiana, which is the annual publication for 21st century scholars and Indiana Commission for Higher Education. So that photo shoot and acknowledgement just completed last week. So we are looking forward to receiving copies of that photo shoot and the information. So again, that we were designated as representatives for the state, given the work that we've delved into with enrollment increase in 21st century, as well as completers for grades 9 through 12. From the parents' point of view and their testimony, given the students' point of view, again, this particular student happened to be a first generation student. And so the parent testimony lend itself in understanding FAFSA and that process, how the FAFSA is connected to completing the annual tax reporting. Again, college entrance process. What are the colleges that look to online registration or enrollment? Some still use paper pencil. How might the parents work with the college and the high school with obtaining online transcripts and transcripts request with parchment? NCAA clearinghouse. This particular student also happened to be a student athlete, and understanding what that clearinghouse process looked like. And also happened to be that this student there was still yet a gap in financial support. And so how 21st century dollars help to eliminate that gap between other financial aid, athletic financial aid, and then what was left for the parent piece. And again, how connecting that bridge between 8th grade and 9th grade, what that looked like as far as understanding credits and the importance of GPA and the importance of class ranking and making great decisions the first semester of their freshman year. So the calls and mailings to all eligible 8th graders, what we've changed in our practice with following the study with the Leo department at the university was, how do we now continue this process? Because we know that the nudging process works. The calling and the mailing works. And so I'll share in a few moments some of those things that we've changed in our process. One of the big things that we did for school year 2018-19 is that a traditional class preparing for college and career was an entrance course for our 9th graders. What we wanted to do as a district was push that class down and enroll students in their 8th grade year. Again, helping to bridge that gap between transitioning from middle school to high school. And what we did with that curriculum is we also placed it in a digital format. So our students are able to use and begin some of those requirements that they need to have for college entrance, such as essays and researching colleges and the virtual tours that are part of the 21st century benchmark requirements, we were able to begin to embed those in that course. So that was one of the big things that we did for this year. Again, we also wanted to take a look at advocacy and how we were making a number of changes for the students, but what were we being intentional with changing the mindset and the behavior of the adult? And so we also provided professional learning for our counselors, and we reassigned the role of counselor from their historical job requirements, which mostly focused in testing managers, and rotating that into how we can help support students with more college and career and counseling services. So what we did was we led the counselors through professional learning using this new curriculum and how their role as their advocate for our students will help support not only their completing the college and career course, but also ensuring that we are continuing to increase enrollment and completion for our 21st century students. We have a long historical relationship with the TRIO program at the University of Notre Dame, beginning in the students' 7th and 8th grade year as designated talent search students. And so, again, that was another resource that we had available. And so we wanted to be intentional in ensuring that we were connecting those students who are first generation students with the 21st century application. And again, working with those students through their 9th through 12th grade year. So some of the things that we did as an enrollment campaign throughout the years that we simply increased those enrollment opportunities. There is an initial enrollment period at the beginning of the year. We follow that up with a second enrollment period during parent-teacher conferences, which were just conducted last week. There will be a second parent-teacher conference in February. In between those dates are also their high school enrollment, so we will have a campaign there. And then we will have a final campaign at the end of the year in June. So we've increased our enrollment campaigns from 3 times a year now to 6. Another thing that we've done is that we are being very intentional with going into the community. We have established 2 campaigns within the community for this year. One will be this weekend, in fact, at a community resource fair where we will have staff members on site to enroll students at the community health fair. And then we have another similar event that will occur again also in the community in the spring. So those are some of the things that we have done within the corporation or district using the data from the study.
Thank you, Carla, for sharing your experience of working on this evaluation with Leo. And thank you, Sarah, for sharing the results of the evaluation. I would now like to open up the webinar for questions from the listeners. You can submit questions using the Q&A button at the top of your screen. So I see the first question is in relation to Sarah's presentation, the problem of low take-up rates slide. And this person asked, I'm assuming the enrollment rate of those eligible versus a percentage of the total in the school is what was represented?
Yeah, that's right. So that low take-up rates, should I just go back to it?
Yeah.
Give me a second to pull it up. I think it was this figure right here. So this was the fraction of those eligible who enrolled. And then in our intervention, when I gave those percentages, like 8.9% of the control group enrolled, that was starting with, no one in the control group had enrolled when they entered the study by definition. And then by the end of the enrollment period, 8.9% of them had completed their application. So that's the difference between the 2 rates. Thanks for that question. Although, I think that in South Bend, the fraction of the school district that is actually eligible is pretty high. I don't know that number off the top of my head. Carla, do you know it?
It's approximately 65%.
Yeah, so more than half.
Okay, the next question someone asked, Did you find heterogeneous effects?
Yeah, this is an interesting question. So what that means is, did we find that the intervention was more effective for certain types of students? So for example, for girls versus boys, or for Spanish speakers versus English speakers. So you might think there's more of an informational barrier for those Latino families. And so we tested various aspects of heterogeneity and we didn't find anything, meaning that this is useful for the school districts because what it means is you don't need to target your outreach efforts to any particular demographic group, and it's equally effective to just send out those letters or to make the phone calls to all eligible students who haven't yet enrolled.
Great. The next question, someone asked, who made the calls? How do you anticipate making this a sustainable effort?
Oh, yeah. So I'm sorry I didn't explain this properly. For Penn Harris Madison, for PHM, the school district actually was in charge of placing all the calls. But for South Bend, we had Leo interns, our undergraduate interns, went in to Carla's office and sat down at the phones and, just placed calls from the list of phone numbers that the school district gave them. So in terms of sustainability, it's true that we had pretty cheap labor in terms of our Leo interns. But you could imagine, taking school district staff or school counselors and placing these calls, and it basically ended up being about 2 full days of work for our interns. And I think we had 2 interns, right? And 2 research associates.
So another sustainable piece, if I may add on to that, was again, we want to be very intentional in using the data in changing the enrollment and the completion. So we were eligible for a Title IV grant with the Indiana Department of Education. And so we leveraged those dollars to create 2 new positions. Those positions have not started as of yet, but they will be 21st century counselors that we will have full-time within our district to help facilitate, again, the enrollment and the completion of students.
Great, thank you for that question. The next question, what was the sample size for this study?
Oh, that's a good question. So the original list that we got from the 2 school districts was about 800, I think 800 students were FRL eligible, but they hadn't yet completed their enrollment form. And then what ended up happening was we had a couple of schools who did not comply with our randomization. So what that means is here at Leo, we ran the lottery. And then we sent out the list of names who were supposed to receive a phone call and the list of names who were supposed to receive a letter. And if the school district, by accident, mixed up those lists, and so they called the wrong people and sent letters to the wrong people, we decided not to use that data because it was not in compliance with the randomization. So after taking out the contaminated data, we ended up with around 600 students in our final sample. Just for information, we did our analysis on the full 800 as well as the smaller sample, and the results didn't change significantly. But, just for the integrity of the research, we felt it was better to leave out the contaminated data.
The next question, someone asked, I wanted to find out if you're looking to scale up this intervention to other schools, given its success.
So we have talked with the Indiana Commission for Higher Education about doing a broader scale intervention to try to increase enrollment. And it's definitely something we're very interested in, and we're trying to continue pursuing the opportunity. So yes, that is something we're considering and are hopeful of doing in the future.
Thank you for that question. The next question, do parents have to complete a FAFSA to apply? Was any help provided to families to help them complete the application?
So parents do not have to complete a FAFSA in order to enroll or complete the 21st century application. But what we did was we aligned them upon completion of the application. We benchmarked out and timelined out what should happen between enrollment and completion their senior year. And so as we did not help or facilitate the completion of the tax documents, we certainly connected them to the resources within the community.
So Carla, my understanding is that they don't have to do the FAFSA right away at that 8th grade year, but they do have to do it to remain in good standing with the 21C program, right?
That
So
is,
one of the
that is,
milestones.
I'm sorry, yes, that is correct. But the initial enrollment is not necessary. No.
I think this next question, Carla might be able to answer. You mentioned changing the mindset about going to college. What other things are you doing and at what ages to change mindsets?
So beginning in 6th grade, all students required by in Indiana to complete a graduation plan. And so that plan is to help them begin to facilitate conversations and begin researching around what they would like to do and those next steps. So that's the 6th grade induction. And then grade 7 through 12 is continuing to have those conversations around choices, their academic progress, what choices they are selecting in their courses. And then specifically again in 8th grade, where they actually begin their formal process with a preparing and college career course, as well as induction with our college, our CTE program. So again, those students who are obtaining or more interested in the 2-year program, we have CTE supports around that, but we also have CTE supports around those students who would like to pursue both a 4-year program, but also exit with a technical career. So what we did was we just intentionally pushed down a lot of the conversations and programmings that would occur in their 9th grade year down to their 6th through 7th and 8th grade year, so that we're giving them more time to massage that out, as well as continue to change the mindset and support the adults that they engage with keeping those conversations at the forefront.
And thank you for that question. Next question, now that these partnerships are in place, are there plans to study the impact of 21C on educational outcomes?
So we haven't directly pursued this plan. I think it would be interesting. There is a lot of existing research on, evidence as to whether or not financing increases college outcomes, like whether it increases graduation rates or retention. And so far the existing evidence is pretty positive, like financing definitely makes a difference. And so it would be wonderful if Leo was involved with evaluating 21C specifically, but so far we haven't started on that project.
It looks like we have one final question. If anyone else would like to submit questions at this time, please feel free to do so. This question, someone asks, what % of those who apply before high school are eligible to receive the scholarship at the end of high school?
Carla, do you know this number? Actually, I'm not sure.
No, I would have to complete a data dive to obtain those numbers. I do not have those readily in front of me.
Yeah, so when we talked with the guidance counselors, right, this idea of the pipeline, like we're losing some students at the beginning of the application process, and then presumably we lose some more who drop out of the 21C program before they actually get the scholarship. And what they told us was that the really severe leakage point was just at that beginning, but there is some, lesser attrition that goes on throughout the high school process as well. And I'm sorry, we don't have that hard number for you right at the moment, but Andrea, is there a way we can post that?
Yes, we can include that in the slides that will be posted on Leo's website within a day of this webinar.
Okay.
Okay, well, great questions, everyone. Thank you for submitting those. We would like to thank Carla Lee for joining us today to share with Leo and the community her experience on conducting an evaluation. This has really been a great discussion. As Leo works to build evidence-based solutions to poverty, having someone like Carla share key insights from the process of conducting an evaluation with Leo is really invaluable. We would also like to thank everyone who participated in Leo's webinar today on nudging towards a college scholarship. We will be following up with information about how to access the webinar recording and slides. Finally, if you are interested in partnering with Leo on an evidence-building project, please feel free to reach out to me, Andrea Ringer, to schedule an introductory call My email address is listed on the slide. If you have additional questions about the evaluation presented today or are interested in learning more, you can contact Sarah Krager, whose email address is also listed on screen. We thank you for joining us, and we hope you have a great rest of the day.